Okay. The first item is Lindsberg EMS assistance, and they can no longer support an ambulance service. They will be going to a private service sometime in August. The firm date for the 1st, 15th is not for sure yet, but we met on Friday with the EMS director, John Helmer, the city news hospital CEO, Chris Stipe, and Chief Weisman, and 2 of his personnel from the fire department, and Administrator Nick Gregory, and myself. Am I missing anybody? And what we are wanting to do is have the McPherson Hospital EMS provide volunteers, of which on Friday afternoon they thought they could have 3, and McPherson Fire volunteers that we think are 4 at minimum. And that way we would staff them during the week. Because they have volunteers, the problem is during the work week. So we're trying to carve out some type of solution for them pretty much during the week, during the day, and then hopefully their volunteers, whatever, we may get a call like we have in the past to go up there and do something. But we are trying to cover them on a full day basis, Monday through Friday, in order to help them to get to the private thing. This is the immediate solution. The short-term solution is to them to contract with AMR on a private ambulance service. That may only last a couple of years. Well, we met last Monday, I think, with the county, and that we want to come up with potentially a different ambulance service model between the county, city of McPherson, and other cities involved to get a better long-term solution for everybody. So that's what's on the table, long-term, short-term, but the immediate term is to cover the Lindsberg need right now, and that's what we're talking about.
Covering it until August
Till August.
15th or August,
Yeah,
whenever that,
right,
whatever that date is.
whatever the date is.
Mhm.
So the big thing this morning is I'll call on Chief Weisman and Nick Gregory to add anything they want to add, and then get reaction from the other 2 commissioners. You want to come up here?
We have several members that have said that they would step forward to help during this time. So I think we're going to be okay in the short interim to provide what we need to during it's only 8-hour periods for them. So I think we're okay. We can handle this.
Okay. Okay.
And the only thing I'll add is that we are, will be, if this is okay, and if the commission feels moving forward with this, we'll be sitting down with the city attorney to draft a contract that would actually allow us, so our employees that would work on behalf of Lindsberg EMS, we would pay them, and they'd actually be paid through us. We'd have a contract with EMS, Lindsberg EMS, and we'd make sure we cover any overtime benefits and overtime and applicable benefits that we'll be working through. And so this will be a piece that we'll be working on pretty diligently. Hopefully have a draft ready and out to City of Lindsberg as well here fairly quickly.
I will say this too, this is only a BLS unit in Lindsberg, so it's not an ALS unit, which is an EMT level. There might be days that it's an ALS unit, but with Lindsberg has a license for BLS. So. should be pretty easy to find those
Mhm.
people.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
And so the contract will probably be, will be signed by McPherson Hospital EMS. It will be signed by the city of Lynchburg, and it'll be signed by us, and we will take the responsibility for coming up with the charges in the billing for the city. And then the hospital will tell us what they wanted to charge on extra volunteer time and overtime. And then we will bill Lynchburg monthly from the city here for everybody, and then we would reimburse the hospital in this process and try to get from early this week, because they're out of compliance, to the date in August, whatever it ends up to be, when they finish negotiate that contract with AMR. Okay?
So is this something that, the people from here are going to be over there? Are they going to be here and just go there when they get a call, or how's that work?
Either days off. Employees are on their days off and they volunteer to go over there on their days off. We're not sending our staff over that's covering the city that day.
Okay,
But they
So
would physically be located there.
They would
They-
physically be
okay,
located.
on their
over
day
there,
off, they're going to be located in Lynchburg.
And they'll be utilizing their units and
Okay.
their equipment,
Okay.
not our stuff. So
Yeah.
there's nothing, we're
I
not
guess
gonna
that was my
short,
big question
Yeah.
there.
we're
They-
not gonna short the city of McPherson
No.
or. our
They,
Okay.
they have two good units,
Yes, they do.
and they have a good facility that's only about 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah,
So on our days off, volunteers from EMS and from McPherson Fire Department will spend the day in Lynchburg so that they are able to say it's covered.
Good.
We will still have 3 fully staffed shifts while this is going on.
that's good.
Now, they'll only be, I mean, obviously, if we've got needs here, we'll fill our needs first. And so that'll be,
That's
important
We're not
piece of
gonna-
it.
We're not gonna shortchange any of our response territories. And then we also we're gonna ask them to utilize their active 911, which we already have that system. That would give us the ability to know where we're going, our personnel to know where they're going, when they're responding in Lynchburg. We don't have all their streets memorized, obviously. So we have a GPS map that
Okay.
takes us to the location. So we'll share that information as well.
All good questions. Anybody else have a question?
Sounds
I'll
like you've
ask-
done your homework.
Yeah,
That's
I'll-
good.
I'll ask city attorney, because this has an immediate concern, is can we bring a motion when we come back into commission to work out a contract with your approval to be able to offer it to Lynchburg as soon as possible this week?
We can do that.
Okay.
That way we can move forward to get that in place without having to wait till next Monday.
I think that's
Is that
good.
okay with you guys?
Good
Okay,
idea.
got 100%?
Mhm.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we will meet right after this meeting with the city attorney and try to see what we can do to move that forward. Okay, administration, and I'll call on Janetta.
Good morning again. During the spring retreat, the 2021 projected general fund revenues and the 2021 and 2022 mill levy fund projections were presented. And due to the magnitude and the importance of this information, I wish to present that information again for discussion as it relates to the 2021 general fund budget projections. And in what I've just passed out and in the packet is some information. It should look somewhat familiar to you. The first bit of information I'm not going to go over in great detail, but It's not in your packet, but it's up there. And the first thing that I presented during the spring retreat was our first quarter budget to actual in the general fund, and as well as the ancillary funds outside of the general fund. For today's purpose, I'm going to focus mainly on the general fund as it relates to the topic of conversation. In budget to actual, it's what I present on a quarterly basis. It tells us where we're at in our expenditures and revenues compared to where we're at, which is 25% of the year in the first quarter. As it relates to the revenues that you have in front of you, those line items that are in blue have not met that 25% of the point in time in the year in comparison to what has been collected. Some of them is a timing, as if transfers may or may not have been made, appropriations that we receive, or contracts that we receive on a quarterly basis. So I'm not concerned with those line items. Where the biggest concern may lie are in those line items such as license fees, some of the taxes that we receive. Don't think there's any questions on this, but this just gives us a talking point to move forward. The next one is expenditures. And you can see that just for today's purposes, the revenue is the same way. Those are the departments that are in the general fund out to the left, and the adopted budget to the right of that. And then you can see that historically we are way under that 25% expenditures through the first quarter, with the exception of the transfer of 500,000 from the general fund to the street department, which is a budgeted transfer that we make each and every year. Are there any questions on that report? This is just a good segue into the next document that you have in front of you. And this is the 2021 general fund revenue projections. I wanted to provide to the commission guidance on where we're at for the first quarter, which you can see at the bottom of that sheet. In the first quarter revenues, we've collected almost $3.5 million in the general fund. And for projection's sake, you can see that I have provided at the bottom some assumptions, and that assumption are those line items that have the yellow cell in the total revenue assumes that 100% of the budget gets collected. Those that are in blue, the assumption that I made for the last 3 quarters of the year, that we mirror what we collected in 2020. So those are the assumptions that were made on each particular case. Now, I will say that the ad valorem tax at the very top of the page, even though it is in yellow and at 97%, which is a 3% delinquency, you can see the second line is delinquency tax. So that 3% delinquency is usually made up in the people that pay their taxes in a delinquency basis. So it pretty much equals about 100% of the taxes that we levy each year in the general fund. And so that being said, if you go to the total revenue column at the very bottom, I am estimating, based off of these projections, $10.5 million to be collected in the general fund. That in comparison to the adopted budget column, which is the first set of numbers next to the line items at $10.7 million, gives us almost a $200,000 shortfall in the general fund for 2021. Now, once again, these are projections subject to change based on all sorts of different things that may happen through the rest of the year. But I wanted to give you a snapshot as we go into the 2022 budget and building that budget. The beginning cash balance in the general fund plays a huge part of that equation as it relates to the amount of ad valorem tax required to fund the 2022 budget. Are there any questions on this document here?
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
These assumptions is what we talked about basically with a $200,000 shortfall. And if you remember in the retreat, I had said, but some feel the target budgeting is archaic. I don't feel it's archaic, but it is a way to plan now in the beginning of the year for $200,000. And I threw out the amount of $300,000 because I do believe that this can erode a little bit in this year. Part of it is this is just revenue. And if in fact we continue, if you drive by almost any car dealership, their stock is low. Because of the semiconductor problem, the production is low. If you don't get new cars in, you don't have used cars to sell because people still have to drive the car they have. So we have, and I talked with the chamber on Thursday, we have a problem in that we're slow to get supply right now. And we're also not getting a used car, which you say, oh, well, the used cars are already out there, but they're not trading them because there's not as many new cars to trade. So that's a problem from that standpoint. The other thing is that even in our MIH thing, the cost of housing, the materials has gone up. 10 days ago, a sheet of plywood was $100. And that is problem, is that if you contracted to build something, between the time you contracted and maybe you start building, there's been a big upswing. Jeremy Hill of WSU Economic Development Analysis has, since the first of the year, there's much in certain products is a 97% increase. That's going to slow us down, and that's going to slow down who can purchase at the lumber yard, who can purchase other kinds of things on this. So that's why I put the other 100,000 in. And the other thing is our estimate on gasoline cost is slowly inching up. I think it will peak later this year, but we may, depend on our usage, be over budget. So you have to plan now so that the next 8 months you try to do it. If in fact things end up better than we can estimate at this time, and we're only making the best assumptions we can make, and I commend Richard and Janetta in all the work that they put in on this thing, but we do not have a total crystal ball that tells us exactly what is going to happen. So we have to plan for a more conservative type thing. And then if we're okay in August, September, there are things that we can walk back out. But if we're not, we're going to be in trouble. And Janetta's favorite phrase is cash is king. My phrase for years is you cannot spend budget. You can only spend cash. If you don't have cash, you can't do something. It doesn't matter what it said in the budget. So that's what we're trying to position ourselves so that we will have the cash necessary to really do what we have to do.
Great. The mayor makes a great point. So what I'd like to do is focus on the general fund. Sydney, if you can go to the next slide. Should be right down. There you go. So I'm going to go to the end, which the mayor likes to do. is see the results of the end at the beginning. And then I'll go through the general fund and how I arrived at these projections.
Right.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. So if you recall at the retreat, what you're looking at here are all the mill levied funds that the city assesses ad valorem taxes against. We're going to focus on the general fund today, but there are the bond and interest fund, which is where the city pays all of our debt service for our GO bonds. And then we have two benefit funds, the non-public safety and the public safety, which are both mill levied funds. And then we have the industrial fund and the CIP fund. And traditionally, this is based on ordinance that the industrial fund levies $50,000, just a flat 50,000 each and every year. Same with the CIP, which is 50,100. And then the city also levies ad valorem tax to the library, of which they have an operating fund and a benefits funds, just like we do with the general fund and our benefit funds.
Yeah, and
So-
I think even though the library goes through the city, they work up that and we are the pass-through.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Their board passes their budgets and they just pass it on to us and we accept it and levy the tax. So in this exercise here, there are a lot of assumptions, a lot of predictions, just as the mayor alluded to. There could be a shift in revenue, there could be shift in expenses, but I'll get into the details behind these numbers here in a minute as it relates to the general fund. These I'm not going to get in today, but these are assuming that the library brings us flat budgets. If they don't, then that'll affect the mill levy in this exercise as well. But this is the amount of ad valorem tax required for the 2022 budget. And this is the amount of the mill levy associated with this ad valorem tax. And once again, there's another assumption, and the assumption is that we have a flat assessed evaluation. Hopefully I'm wrong, and it goes up substantially, but in this exercise, I wanted to be as conservative as I could and keep that number flat. So in the calculation, with assessed evaluation, once again, just to go back to some of our basic budgeting, 1 mil equals $130,090. So you take the assessed evaluation divided by 1,000, gives you the value of a mil. So you take your ad valorem tax divided by the value of the mill, gives you the amount of mills required to fund that 2022 budget. I've also included over here the 2021 mill levy that we budgeted. Once again, this is the budgeted mill levy. This isn't the final that comes out in October, November, when the final assessed evaluation is determined. I'm comparing budget to budget. So based off of the amount of ad valorem tax required, this is the amount of mills needed. If the commission's goal is to keep a flat mill levy of the 52.214, this is the amount of ad valorem tax to do that, which means during the budget process, $72,619 would have to be cut somewhere in these 4 funds. And we can't cut bond and interest because we got to pay our debt. Benefits does not have a reserve, and those are all based off of usually typically estimates, of which for 2022, we're going to include a 10% increase in our health insurance, and then FICA, Medicare, and all those we have to pay based off of what we get charged. So really the only place to do a $72,000 cut would be in the general fund, and that's why I'm going to focus on that today. Any questions on this overview? And once again, this assumption, the point I want to make And what I'll continue to reiterate is my prediction or my projections assumes that $200,000 loss in revenue in 2021 in the general fund.
So if that $200,000 loss doesn't happen,
Right.
that number could be.
Right.
potentially
If there's
reduced.
any shift, if
For
we
what you need to
don't
know.
have that loss in the 200,000 and everybody, all my other assumptions I'm going to present as we go forward, that number will change. If we don't have the $200,000 loss, then you take 200,000, subtract 72,000, then we have $130,000 that you can add back into your expenditures to fund a flat 52.214 mils.
And that's why adjustments, at least temporarily right now, are important so that we don't have that $72,000 deficit under all these assumptions.
Can you go to the next slide? Sure that's- Okay. So, general fund. And once again, this is estimated because we have not received the final audit. They were here this last week. They were scheduled to be here 3 days. They were here a day and a half. So that was huge for us based off of the pre-work that we had done in advance. So it was good to see them, but it was good to see them go as well. But until we get the final audited numbers, I just have to preface by saying this is estimate. So this is our general fund estimated ending cash balance at the end of 2020. So what is audited is this 4.8 million. This was our beginning cash balance in 2020. This is an audited number, so it is good. The next portion of the equation is our revenues. And this was revenues in the general fund and transfers of 10.4 million. So to get your total resources available, you take your beginning cash balance plus your revenues, a little over $15.2 million. Now we subtract out of our expenditures, which these were December year-to-date plus 13th month, and any transfers made at 9.7 million, gives us our estimated ending cash balance of $5,519,547 in comparison to what we budgeted. And this was budget, this was not target. So our certified budget had a beginning cash balance going into 2021 of $4,409,961. A difference of $1.1 million. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we had that 1.1 million. If you recall, we had over $444,000 in spark money. We had revenues above what we budgeted. If you recall, our sales tax came in more than the 2 million that we budgeted. And then there were a lot of departments that came in under their budget expenditures. They didn't spend all 100% of their budget. So that attributed to that 1.1 million. And as the mayor alluded to, I always say cash is king. I'm going to demonstrate why cash is king in this case. So remember the 5.5 million? Go to the next one. This is 2021. So this is the general fund as it relates to this year. Here's our $5.5 million that we just ended 2020 or our beginning 2021 cash balance. This scenario here, if you go back to your first sheet, you don't need to. I'm just saying they can. You can keep it there. But if you go to that first sheet that I have, and I walk through where we're short approximately 200,000, you'll see the total projected revenue at 10.5 million. So once again, this scenario that I'm walking you through assumes that $200,000 shortfall in revenue in the general fund. I'm sorry. I know I'm not speaking into the mic. Try to do better. So you take your beginning cash balance, add in all your revenues, gives us our resources available right at $16 million. Now, for this exercise, we are assuming that each department spends 100% of their budget, okay? And typically, and I showed you during the spring retreat, some different scenarios of actuals, and it doesn't necessarily matter, but typically, most of the departments, I think it was in 2019, they spent 98% on average of their budget. In 2020, I believe it was, or anyway, we have never had a case where each department spends 100% of their budget. It ranges anywhere from 95 to 98%. And then last year it was way under because we did the target budget based off of COVID and that impact it might have on revenue. So we did implement a target budget that cut significant amount of our expenditures. The majority of that was the transfer from each department's operating fund into the equipment reserve, which was around 629,000. So there was a significant cut in expenditures in last year. But this case assumes that each department spends 100% of their budget. And if you recall, in the 2021 budget, we also made up for what we cut in transfers into the equipment fund from last year and included what we needed in 2021. So we made up for that. That being the case, if you take your beginning cash balance plus your revenues, subtract out these expenditures, we get an ending cash balance estimated at a little over $4.1 million. That same scenario going into 2022, it looks a little different because we adjust out the ad valorem tax, because in this exercise, we're trying to determine how much ad valorem tax is required to fund the budget. Like I showed you in the summary page earlier, we take that same estimated ending beginning cash balance for 2022, budgeted revenues. Once again, there's an estimate. We had to assume that the 2021 revenue is flat for 2022. So that could go up, could go down, but for this projection, we're assuming it's flat. For 2022, the commission gave the department heads a guidance of 2% increase in their budget. It also assumes that the $3.2 million reserve stays flat. In some cases, each department's step increase accounts for that 2%. Some departments, it's less based off of some turnover that's happened. And so their payroll expense for their step increase isn't as significant as some. And it gives us our total expenses around 14.7 million. So take your beginning cash balance, add in your revenues, subtract out your expenses, gives you the amount of ad valorem tax required to fund the 2022 budget. That's based off a 2% increase. That 3.5 million also is populated into that summary sheet based off of assessed evaluation that I showed earlier with no increase. That's a flat, is a mill levy of 27.572 based off of the budgeted mill levy for the general fund for 2021 was at 28.374. So it's a little bit less. But I just wanted to provide you the detail, and I went through each fund and did the same exercise. Not going to present it today, but there are some assumptions in those calculations. But I just wanted to show that the $200,000 shortfall in 2021's general fund revenue is accounted for here, and it also populates into that summary. Any questions? So, I don't need this. So today, the reason I'm wanting to present this, I wanted to make sure everybody truly understood what I presented during the retreat and had the option or the ability to ask any sort of questions that may be lingering. Because this is a lot of data, and it's at a 50,000 foot level for sure. And there are a lot of assumptions, and we're only one quarter into the year. And this is really the biggest hurdle that we face when we build a budget, you know, and we're looking at cash balances and trying to project out where we're going to end cash wise at the end of this year to fund next year's budget. And that's the biggest fallacy in budgeting. You know, 8-9 months ahead.
Not a fallacy, not a fallacy. It is an issue that we have to deal with, but
Right.
it's fact of life,
Yeah,
not a
it's just,
fallacy.
it's just a hurdle. And as the mayor alluded, that's the reason a lot of places do a target budget as it relates to shortfalls in revenues or things like COVID. Certain things happen. But I at least wanted to provide you with a benchmark of what I'm projecting based off of the assumptions and the estimates of the shortfall, and get a consensus from the commission if they would choose to do a target budget at this point in time.
Well, first of all, I thought we had a consensus to do a target budget, but maybe it's up for discussion again. But I'll remind you, if you don't take advantage early, we made this budget 9 months ago, and we already see in the first quarter $200,000. And I personally believe that we will not see some of the revenue that we have, and our expenses are going to go up. So it's better to make a target budget adjustment and then be able to plug back in stuff that you have money for, than not make the adjustment. And then in September, say, how are you going to make the adjustment? It's too late. You cannot make the adjustment later in the year. Once we get through the budget process for 2022 and we see where we're at, yeah, we can make an adjustments. We'll probably make adjustments before we finalize the budget for 2022. Do we have room to do some things we never did? We put in the parking lot for 2021. But if we don't do that, you're gonna have some tough decisions to make in the fall. I would rather not have to make those tough decisions, and that's why I have proposed, and we've done a target budget. Of the 12 years I've been mayor, we've probably done a target budget 11 times. I think it's done well for us. And as Janetta has relayed to you today, almost always we have stayed under budget every year between 95 and 98%. That's important. And that's statute for us in Kansas. We cannot spend more than the cash we have.
Mayor, I have a question. Maybe you can help me with it. Target budgeting seems to me is if we go through this exercise to create a budget and we establish that budget and we all agree on that, and then it comes in, we're going to do a target budget. Does that not lend, and especially doing it 11 out of the last 12 years, does that not lend itself to loading the initial budget with a lot of fluff? Because you know you're going to have a target budget coming up later in the year.
I don't believe so, Commissioner. First thing is, we have really worked hard over that period of time to get as earnest a budget as we can. The one thing we can't control 9 months ago is what the revenue is going to be. We do it, as Janetta said, to the best of our ability in our crystal ball, or what the expenses are going to be. This is probably going to be the hardest year of that period, because there's a potential for less revenue than what we saw 9 months ago. And there is a real potential for higher increases in the materials that we have to buy to do the projects. So that's why You do this all the time. If you don't, and I can tell you from my first year till now, there was tons of fluff that got cut in the budget process. And that was the way everybody brought their most expensive hallucination. We don't do that very much anymore. As you noticed in the last couple of years, the budget is fairly close. But we can't control revenue in any way. It is what it is when it comes in. We can control the expenses, and I'll use the police department as an example. We budgeted for a full staff, hoping that we will get there. At the end of the first quarter, we are not there. When I ask the police department, adjust your budget, what's realistic? Are we going to have one not filled, two not filled at the end of the day? Our best estimate, plus one we have on active military duty, we can make up $100,000 of the $200,000 just in personnel. There, this is the time to make it, to share it with everybody of where we're at. We have a similar type thing in the fire department. Not every department is going to be able to do that. But we are going to take half or more of what is the projected shortfall and make up for it. And now, you know, we're talking a very small thing that you can identify something and decide in August, September, do you still want to do it? Just don't spend it now and we can't get it back. That's, I don't know if that helps you or not.
Or just to give good direction, I think you gave a great example, Mayor. For department heads, is there something specific? I mean, obviously, there are expenses that you could potentially have at the end of the year. For example, like you talk about staffing, like seasonal staff for the park, it would be a good example of something, either you make it or you don't by that time. But things like transfers, delaying transfers, with the ability to not make the transfer. Are there other examples of things that you might give good direction to staff on that we might do to hit those numbers?
Go ahead.
I can tell you, and if you recall back in May, we had a hard time identifying big dollar amounts, because last year we had to cut a lot to help with our cash carryover based off of an unknown, and that unknown was COVID. And we're kind of in that same situation now as it relates to sales tax. Is what does the rest of the year look like for sales tax as it relates to the general fund, which is the city share of the county's portion of the sales tax, of which we budgeted at $2 million. So in my opinion, that sales tax could make or break us this year. It could either increase and hit us over that $200,000 shortfall that we're looking at, or it could go down and be in a different situation. But for budget purposes, you have to assume and estimate and project. And so that's what this exercise is doing. As it relates to the department's expenditures, you can see here, this is where each department is through the first quarter. And I believe if you look at this bottom, this 21%, that's the total of the expenditures to date out of the general fund. Now, up here in administration is where we make a lot of the transfers, and the transfers that we budget for are 50,000 into the golf course fund. The golf course is setting very well right now cash wise, but you also, if you recall, there was a mower and a Danfoss pump, and the installation of that Danfoss pump takes us to about $90,000 that we're going to have to transfer out of the golf course fund into the equipment fund to pay for all of that. And we were about $100,000 ahead as far as our cash carryover from last year into this year. So basically that surplus of cash that they carried over is basically gone. Now, if they have another great year, we won't have to transfer that 50,000, but we'll have to look at that each month and come to you to determine whether we want to make that cash transfer into the golf course. So that's $50,000. And if you recall, we also budgeted 90,000 to be transferred from the general fund into the municipal building fund. Last year, we cut that from 90,000 to 45,000. That was part of the target budget process. That's a transfer that could be delayed. And then there's also the transfers out of each department's line item into the equipment fund. We typically make that in June and then again at the end of the year. There's right now around $900,000 sitting in the equipment fund. There was a approval for the purchase of the street sweeper, which is right around 200,000. So there is some cash in there if we would need to approve any of those capital expenditures based off a long lead time. So there are some transfers that could be delayed until we get to closer to the end of the year to see how our revenues play out. The mayor did mention, I did a calculation based off of the open positions in the police department. It's around $100,000 of what we're projecting to save in salaries based off of those open positions. Other than that, I don't.
Lane, some of
Good.
those transfers could be, you could say, if we get down to the heart of it at the end of the year, you could say, instead of transferring this total amount, you could transfer a lesser amount, and you could make up some of that by not making the full transfer or doing a partial.
Yeah.
To do that,
You
but-
can hold off on them.
I guess my other advice to department heads would be, are there things that we can put off? Understanding that there's lead times for whether it's something, goods or something you're going to be purchasing to assist your department. Are there things that we can wait till after we've made it past the third quarter?
No.
That we can delay and still get in before the end of the year?
And
I think of all the transfers that you mentioned, we can even make the first half of the equipment fund. I'm not for delaying equipment fund and having any deal there, but all the other things, plus what we can have already are saving in wages and everything, are going to more than meet the $300,000 goal I threw out in the spring retreat. We've got the whole budget process to go through. And this is going to be a hard year because we may not be seeing a big increase in revenue, but you're going to see some big increases in materials. And you're not going to have any way, if you have to do it, to do it. If we have another pump replacement at the golf course or whatever, I guarantee you it won't be as cheap as this year. And this year wasn't as cheap as 3 years ago when we did it. So the problem that I always argue in the legislature is you get upset about ad valorem tax, but the fact of the matter is we've held our mill levy almost constant for 12 years. The one thing we can't control is how much the thing goes up. If inflation continues to be what all of these prognosticators say, it's a problem. It's a problem, and we have a problem in the supply line. And Commissioner Weens knows this. He should have ordered a trailer for his private business a year ago from when he did in order to get it. Even if you want something, you may not be able to get it, even if you had money to pay for it. So we go ahead and get a little bit more conservative. And as we go through the budget process in August, September, hey, if we're sitting good, we know what's in the parking lot. We can go forward. If Michael came to me in August and said, I'm still down 3 officers, I've got 3 great people to hire, am I going to tell him you can't get the full staff? No, but I will have 9 months that I didn't pay any of that. And now what does that mean? Does that help your overall budget? Did you need something that is available in there. It may not be used. The police is in the general fund. Maybe there's another part of the general fund that can take advantage of that because we need to do that then we can make the move. All I'm saying is, what is our guideline for probably a couple years even before I became mayor 12 years ago? We are as conservative as possible in not being unrealistic on revenue. And we are the same on the expense. And if we can do better, that's what we want to do. But we cannot afford, because of state statute, to run out of cash. That's just the way it is. It's not like, hey, I could run down to the bank if I have a Main Street business and maybe based on the last 3 years, they'll give me a little bit more. I will say in today's market, and I've done planning for a bank, that they are not going to turn cartwheels on that kind of explanation either, because they're worried about the same thing that I'm looking at. And I see one of our private business people shaking his head. Yeah, it's harder to get money today. It's going to be harder to get, even if the cost of housing goes up, it means it's harder to get a loan to get the housing. So now's the time to tighten your belt a little bit, and you have a known parking lot, and you hope you can get to the known parking lot in August, September. But everybody has a little bit of something. If you take the percentage of $300,000 to the entire general fund budget, it's not that much to tighten up. It's pretty much status quo. And if we have to do a street project, if we have to do something at wastewater, those are essential things that we can't get away from. But there are other little things to get to 300,000. I think from health and safety segment of the city, we're going to be halfway there. So where is the other little bit at? And then if we have it, do it. I think you can pay half of the equipment fund. I'm not for delaying equipment funds. I was anxious about that last year. If we had not really made a great recovery, we'd be in a toilet and equipment fund right now. I'd just like to, I need to have that. You're going to need machines to serve the public. And those machines are getting more expensive all the time. And that's the part we're going to deal with when we get to the budget process, is if you need a new mower, if you need a new excavator, if you need a new Bobcat, they're not what they cost 2 years ago. And if we order on some of these things, even a fire truck, we are going to create an encumbrance. Now, we try everything we do not to have an encumbrance, but I got a feeling 2022, maybe 2023, there are going to be some encumbrances we can't avoid because we have to put our order in knowing we can't get delivery in that year. We ordered patrol cars as an example so that we could get them early in the year. If we waited and ordered in this time of year, we wouldn't be getting them. And what is everybody trying to be with the manufacturers? The New York Cities, the Chicagos, the Houstons, the Dallas, once they put their order in this environment, there's nothing left for the rest of us. They say, you'll get it whenever we have it. Same that you experienced with trailers. We can't afford to do that.
So since the retreat, what I talked to the department heads about during the department head meeting last week was just what the mayor had suggested was the target budget of 300,000 to be cut in the general fund in 2021, at least until August, September, whatever that time frame looks like, where we can make a determination on what the revenues are going to do for the remainder of the year. I also sent out an email to each, to the commission, asked them not to reply all on what their take on the target budget was. And there were some questions, and I met personally with Commissioner Mel, and I also answered some questions to Commissioner Weens, and indicated that we would have this discussion today. And the discussion today is really to get a consensus of what the commission wants to do to the 2021 general fund budget. And if there is a consensus to do a target, what does that look like to the department heads? Because just telling them, I need 300,000, I don't know that I'm going to get a hand raised and someone say, here's $300,000.
Well, nobody's
think
going to
we-
give you $300,000. We're only asking, what is it that you can chip in, and then we see where we're at. We're not asking every department for $300,000. It's a small amount.
So does that give the department heads kind of an idea of some of the things that we might be potentially looking at too?
Okay, well, what I would like to do, based off of where I'm at on the budget, I'd like to at least during, if it's okay with the commission, during their budget presentation, if they could give their ideas of what they're contributing to that 300,000, so that I have a venue, so that I can gather this
Yeah.
and present it back to
Yeah,
you
that's
guys.
what we've
That's
always done.
exactly-
That's
that's
what
what
we've
we
always
need.
done. And we're doing that in,
Great.
we've changed to mornings in May, right?
17th, 18th, 19th, is that right?
And we'll have another month under our belt and we'll have an idea. But if you don't plan for a shortfall and you have one, you're in trouble. I'll ask, how much are you running behind 19 right now? On your business?
Oh. Some of my businesses are actually, or one of my businesses is actually comes with budget tonight. But we are definitely running into inventory availability. If that is an indication at all, I know you already touched on this with vehicles. But hopefully in the next 3 to 9 months, we'll start seeing inventory supplies come back to the retail sector. If that starts happening, your sales tax should go back up. Some other businesses though that I've had, they've been utterly decimated. There's been some permanent changes in the landscape. My freight delivery company, for instance, we lost 2 major contracts. One because we haven't been able to find a reasonable substitute.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in a rebuilding mode, but the sales tax thing, like I said, in my limited scope, I'd be optimistic to see that those numbers will continue to rebound between now and the end of the year, just as inventory becomes more readily available. But you hit on the other significant issue, expenses, equipment and construction materials, and that's not going to go away.
No. And if it rebounds by the end of the year, we may miss our targets in the middle of the year, which we won't make up all of a sudden in the end of the year. And I think we're going to have we have to have a better crystal ball for what lies ahead on all of these things for 2023 when we do that. So we're trying to position ourselves to be. We are fortunate, I think, in a form of government that we've had very little political argument. We stay on what really needs to be done. And you can go to a lot of the other forms of government and it's a political nightmare. And I don't want a political nightmare. I want to stay on task. I want to do the best job we can do. And I believe that's what our form of government does, our ability to react quickly while we meet weekly. And we have target budget, revised budget. It is only a temporary delay, and we hope we can go back. And as our percentages show, we've almost always gone back to a fairly good percentage when you say we've spent 95 to 98% of what we budgeted. So what we've done is we crafted, how do we get to the finish line better? The important thing is getting to the finish line. So I think Jeanette has done a good job here. She's done a good job of sending stuff out to the department heads. And we do what we can. We'll see where we're at in the budget meetings. And if we end up seeing better things happening in the world, I'll be the first one to say, hey, maybe we can move from tightening up 2 notches to letting 1 out. But let's be ready for the worst and hope for the best. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you. Okay. I'll move on then to Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan.
I will cover this. Back in 2019, the city participated in the Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan input session that we had down in Heston for our region, or Region G. And some of the things we talked about are, and this plan has to be renewed every 10 years. We talked a little bit about some of the incidents that we've had over the 10-year period, talked about some of our challenges and where we see potentially some of our projects for hazard mitigation coming in. They asked for input from every area, from every municipality or county organization within the region. And you can pull up that plan, maybe easiest to kind of, that's the resolution. There's actually a hyperlink on there. Yeah. So this is like a significantly long document. What I would like to do is go ahead and put this on the website. It's on the county website right now. It basically goes into what our hazards are, and it forces us to kind of make sure we've analyzed all the hazards that might exist. Part of this particular piece, for the state makes hazard mitigation funds available based upon those become available as different hazard losses that the state takes. There's additional money available for that, and different counties or city organizations are able to apply for those funds. But the big part of being able to apply for those is having adopted the hazard mitigation plan for the region. And 10 years ago, we did the same thing. We adopted the plan that came out then. And our recommendation would be to go ahead and adopt this plan now. County just sent this out. It's been adopted. It says draft on there, but I believe they have a draft. It has been adopted, subject to the different organizations and taxing subdivisions within the area adopting that. So you look through, I'd encourage you all to look through there and kind of see some of the information that they provide to give you an idea of different levels of planning that different organizations have done. And with that, I do have prepared a resolution that allows us to go ahead and recognize the plan as it is. What we would do following that is we'd go ahead, after it's approved, we'd send a copy over to the county, and the county would forward that to the Kansas Emergency Management to let them know that we've adopted the plan officially. And so that's kind of the long and short of it. Does anybody have questions? I'll do my best to answer those. But actually, the plan's put together by a consultant based upon the input that they receive. So if you look in there, there's a section of it that talks about different planning opportunities that an organization may take advantage of. I don't know what page it is, but that's as long as we've adopted it, even if we find out we have more dire hazard mitigation needs, we can apply for those. Just because they're the ones listed does not mean that we can't apply for something. So I think one of the things in there is trying to find opportunities to build additional storm shelters if there's funds available. If that's the one we want, and there's something we want to pursue related to that, it would allow us to go after that hazard mitigation money by the fact that we've adopted this plan. So that's the long and short of kind of what we're talking about here. The one thing else you'll see is that McPherson County has not received any hazard mitigation funds in quite some time. So I think it creates good opportunity for us to go after and pursue some of those if we determine it makes sense for us. And I would hope that in the next several years, we might potentially apply for some of those funds.
Is it, we're slow coming on this, so now that we have it, would you like it to come up next week so that you have more time to look at it?
Let's look at it and put it on commission for next week.
Okay,
Okay, like I said, I'd encourage each of you guys to go out and look at the actual plan. As I mentioned, we worked on this nearly 2 years ago, so there may be things that have changed and become bigger needs. So just by adopting it doesn't mean that we're saying there's not other opportunities, but I would encourage you all to look at it in great detail.
okay, all right, we'll bring it next week.
All right.
Okay, electric scooter work group formulation.
I talked with the city attorney a little bit following, we had a presentation several weeks ago to talk about the possibility of scooters, electric scooters that they've becoming more and more popular across the state. There's companies that provide those and rent those out. Essentially, they stay at both on private and public locations where they have drop-off locations. There's obviously some concerns with different locations where those might be able to be operated. They have geofencing and some other capabilities that might limit some of that, but we want to make sure we take a good look at our regulations and how they tie in. I've kind of put together a list of potential people that might be involved in that discussion. And you can kind of see the list. I've put city attorney, some representation from police department, public works, public lands, possibly McPherson Main Street. The two colleges, I see those as potential users of the service if we decide to go forward with this. CVB, the CVB was initially involved with that and it would be something that they could also promote. City administration, possibly a commission representative on that committee, and then anybody else that the governing body might have. We want to, I think, I've done a lot of research just from what other communities have done that have considered it or adopted it. And I think there's some good regulations out there. And I think we want to sit down and look at what might be the best fit. And then ultimately, it's going to be up to the governing body to decide whether this is even a direction they want to go. I know I've heard some concern expressed and there is everywhere that these are considered and allowed within the community. So by putting together a work group, we can get together and talk about the issues that might exist and hopefully move fairly diligently to have a recommendation to the governing body in a fairly timely manner.
Does either commissioner want to serve on this work group?
I will.
Okay, put the Commissioner Weems down.
That's up to the governing body. So
Yeah, why don't you just put a category of community business? And you may get more than one person.
are you okay with the others on this list or anything you want to, anyone specifically from, I could just reach out to these and say, hey, we'd like a representative, just any other people you guys would like on this list? I had Main Street, so I don't know if, so I don't, we absolutely could bring the chamber on too.
Yeah, better put the chamber on.
Okay.
They can work with their membership, bigger membership.
Like I said, we want to have something to you pretty quickly. So if this is the direction you guys want to go, we'd organize this and try to meet here within the next week or two if we can do
Okay.
that.
All right, anybody have a problem with that? Nope. Go. Okay, public lands and facilities, Wayne Burns.
Okay, the first item is it's a budgeted item for Turkey Creek Golf Course. It's an annual purchase of top dressing sand from Quick Creek. And as we discussed earlier about prices going up, if you look at the freight charge on that, it's almost as much as the material. And that's one thing that we need to look at in the future on purchasing from this organization.
Bring it next week, Wayne.
So I'll bring it next week. Next item is for payment to BPU for 2 downtown meters to monitor to meter the water that's used to water the flower beds. And both of those meters is $3,000.
As much as I hate to say it, better bring it next week. I don't like it, but bring it.
Next one is water line repairs at the band shell in Lakeside Park. We received a quote from Jim's Plumbing to repair the west side Lakeside Park water line that supplies water to shelters 5 and 6, the band shell, the Swan Court fountain, and the flower beds. Jim's Plumbing will bore and dig a water line and install 2 1-inch valves. Cost includes boring, materials, and labor, $1,500.
Bring that next
Yeah,
week.
probably a bargain.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff Woodward.
We're at the south end of Mingenback Lake, is in need of repair. We put an estimate together in the amount of 2060. This is considerably higher than I thought it was going to be. The street department will construct a new wall and install a steel plate to replace the old timber gate on the original weir. The plate's estimated at $600. We don't have a firm quote. We should be getting it today. But the verbal quote was between 5 and 6, down from the original one we had at 1,700. And then an additional, if we choose to powder coat it, would be an additional $400. Again, we don't have an exact quote on that. With the gate being submerged full time, it'd be prudent to have a good coating on it to avoid rust. So look for it to come in under this 2520, but not very much.
You can bring it next week, and I think if we're going to do this for everybody for the future, we need to powder coat that.
I do too.
Otherwise,
I
we're
agree.
gonna have another expense when it rusts out. Okay, you got one more item?
Damage occurred to the backhoe bucket on the mini excavator. Needs to be repaired. The street department received a quote from Metal Arc Welding and Fabrication Inman in the amount of $1,013.52 to repair the bucket and build an adapter to lift RCP pipe section safely.
Bring it next week. Yep, that'll work.
Anything else in study session?
It just to give you guys a heads up, we started looking at potential areas for a neighborhood development type project through CDBG, where this is what we talked a little bit at the retreat about, looking at, you do a street and you do housing project along with it. We took our first drive of those different sections that we presented to you guys on during the retreat, and we're hoping to have kind of a priority list to you guys potentially next week. We kind of drove for one where I think when the Department of Commerce will come out and do a review of these, there's a couple things that we might consider, whether the number of houses and the condition of the houses in the target areas. And then also one thing we have to consider is where the streets end up actually being, and what they will have to do on those sections that are adjacent to the streets is they'll have to go in and survey each of those along that stretch of property. And they'll have to meet 51% there. The properties that are eligible through the housing program just have to meet it based upon filling out those applications. So it's this type of CDBG grant's a little bit different in the fact that you have to do survey and you have to rely on eligibility. We want to present a project that I think will get funded, that they'll look at as favorable, both from a housing needs area and from a street needs area. And so we've looked at that, and I'll probably bring that to you guys next week, a list of potential options for you guys to consider. And then we don't necessarily need to take action right away, but it would give you guys a chance to go drive those areas, look at the streets that we're discussing, and hopefully come up with one that I think will be a good candidate for that project.
Okay, sounds good. It's if at all we can make an application, we need to, for the future, we need to keep on renovating housing, but this is a chance for us to get street money as well, and we need to do that. Okay, that was the last thing. Is there anything else that needs to come to study session? Okay, the study session is over. We're back in session.